right, Powell was supposed to speak at 8 p.m. They're supposed to go live at 7:30. I don't know what's happening. We should be seconds away. I'm not totally convinced they aren't pranking us at this point. Could be a prank. Could be channels trying to cover it. Nobody has anything other than this. And so if they got it, we got it. Appreciate you being here. I know you have a choice in your 𝐤𝐴 watchings. You chose wisely. Late night pow. Rugging us already. Yep. Shouldn't be a super long speech either way, though. We will see. This is economic policy at Stanford, I believe. Even though it says Hoover, I don't know. But he is giving a keynote / opener. And I guess nobody knows what's going on. Rumors of 𝐤𝐴 resigning or being fired. Are you really falling for that still in 2025? And once it's 2026, you can fall for it again. But like still in this year, come on. Come on now. I got a bridge to sell you. I was not going anywhere. He'll be the chairman until May of 26, and he'll be on the board. So he'll be on the FOMC until sometime in 2028. Ain't going anywhere. Chair Atkins of the SEC speaking tomorrow. Did not plan for this. That was not planned. It's at 10 a.m. Probably cover that. $8:01. Yeah, he's classically late. Oh, there we go. Let's roll.
Those three undergraduates in the front row in the far corner.
Oh, those undergrads.
Want their picture taken with you.
I can do that.
And they've been at me for about a week.
Whoa.
Got it. Okay. Scott, ready to go? Well, we could just enjoy the silence for a moment.
Those undergrads.
I am Peter
undergrad right
Robinson,
there.
Institution. Welcome to the second of 3 panel discussions in honor of the late Secretary of State and longtime fellow here at the Hoover Institution, George Shultz. The first panel concerned Mr. Shultz as a champion of human rights. The third and final panel will discuss his contributions to foreign policy. This panel is George Shultz as an economist. With us, Mike Boskin, who has been a Hoover Fellow for about a quarter of a century, whose public service includes chairing the Council of the President's Council of Economic Advisors and the administration of President George H.W. Bush, and whose private work involves many board memberships, including longtime board membership at Oracle. Condoleezza Rice. I'll go ahead with the introduction just to be, I think everybody knows who Condi Rice is. Public service includes National Security Advisor and Secretary of State in the administration of President George W. Bush. Private service includes Provost of Stanford University and Director of the Hoover Institution. Which brings us to the man who wins the award for the most distance traveled to join us here this evening. Jerome Powell earned his undergraduate degree from Princeton and his law degree from Georgetown. I should mention that at Princeton, he was a member of the same eating club as George Shultz and first became aware of the presence and career of George Shultz by having lunch under George Shultz's picture, correct?
Something like that.
Something like that. All right. Jerome Powell's government service includes service at the Treasury Department during the President H.W. Bush, his work in the private sector as a partner at the Carlyle Group. Since 2018, Jay Powell has served as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Chairman Powell will begin this evening with some brief opening remarks. Jay?
Thank you, Powell.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you,
That's why we're
𝐂𝐡𝐷.
here,
Thank you,
baby.
Michael, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm deeply honored to have been asked to speak here today about the remarkable legacy of George Shultz. And just to be
Great.
clear right at the start, I will not address current economic conditions or monetary policy.
Wrap it up. Wrap it
So
up.
I've been an admirer of George Shultz since my college years. I saw him then and now as a great role model. As I mentioned just a few months ago when delivering the baccalaureate address to Princeton's class of 2025, 50 years after my own graduation.
Oh, no.
As I told the graduates, when I faced the world after college, I had no real plan,
You better.
but
He
I
will.
knew that I wanted to
He will.
combine a private sector career with public service. And I had in mind
He'll do it. Don't listen to him. He'll do
on
it.
public figures of the era, especially George Shultz, who by then had left to go to Bechtel, whose picture, as I recall, was on the wall of the Princeton Eating Club, of which both of us were members, the Quadrangle Club. George may also have caught my attention because my dad was a labor lawyer who represented one of the major steel companies in collective bargaining. Like George, my father had both a belief in the collective bargaining process and a deep respect for workers. So I followed George's career with interest through the years. It didn't occur to me that I would ever have the honor of meeting him. But I did meet him after I joined the Fed in 2012 as I visited Stanford from time to time. And I remember energetic economic discussions at group lunches in the conference room at Hoover. George was also kind enough to host John Taylor, Michael, and me for a chilly round of golf on a rainy March day. So today our focus is on George Shultz's extraordinarily broad economic accomplishments. But I also want to celebrate the remarkable man and policymaker that he was, and several things stand out for me. He was a man who combined strong principles and unshakable sense and practical
pumping.
problems.
Let's be real. Chair Powell said he's not going to comment on current economics, and look, Bitcoin is breaking to a new high. Let's go.
Government direction. And that theme runs through many of the issues that we'll discuss today, including collective bargaining, wage and price controls, and exchange rates. But he was not an absolutist, and he saw that there are sometimes market failures that do require being addressed by public policy. As one of the most successful policymakers of his era, George brought the intellectual rigor of an academic to the trained, messy work of policymaking. Through 4 cabinet appointments, he dealt with many of the great issues of his day with remarkable success. And he kept at it long after leaving public office, making important contributions here at Hoover on healthcare reform, climate change, nuclear disarmament, and other areas. He may be less well known for this, but George Shultz was deeply concerned about racial discrimination in the workplace and in our society more broadly. He consistently and effectively used his positions of authority to increase opportunities for minorities. And he later noted that there was both a moral and an economic case for this. He stuck to his principles while also treating people with honesty and respect, including those with whom he had policy disagreements. Labor leaders welcomed his appointment as Secretary of Labor, and as many of his contemporaries remarked, faced with divergent views and difficult issues, he was extraordinarily good at steering people toward agreement. A key part of that strategy was to let the parties reach the final agreement themselves. That way, they owned the agreement and were more likely to honor it. His friendships and collaborations were beyond number and knew no partisan bounds. He often said that trust is the coin of the realm and that good things were only possible where there was mutual trust. His integrity provided the basis for that trust. All of those who aspire to serve the public can learn from his example.
Thank you. George Shultz's professional training, labor economics. Mr. Shultz earned his doctorate from MIT in 1949, taught at MIT for 9 years, then moved to the University of Chicago where he served for 11 years, 6 years as Dean of the Business School. Jay, labor economics, the importance of labor in the last century. Help us reconstruct that intellectual world.
So it was such a different unionization today in the United States is under 6%. In those days, it was around 30%. And collective bargaining for the major manufacturing unions in steel and autos and things like that, that was front page news everywhere. The job of the Secretary of Labor in any administration was to know the labor movement, know the leaders, and understand what they wanted. It was a very, very different time. And of course, George Shultz had studied collective bargaining. That was one of his main topics in his work as a labor economist, and he was extraordinarily well qualified to face the challenges of a labor secretary, and indeed went to Los Angeles to talk to President-elect Nixon, just to make sure that President-elect Nixon knew what George's views were on labor economics.
And
Really?
he's a labor
Not
economist.
interested.
This is the middle of the last century, when there's a great debate about labor taking place in the world. The communists had a certain view about labor. Workers of the world unite. This is Mr. Shultz. I'm quoting an interview he gave when he was here at Hoover, looking back over his career. The Chicago School stood for the fundamental value of freedom and free markets, close quote. Mike Condi, how did he integrate
Condi. Can I call
his
you
belief in
Condi?
free
Condi.
markets into labor
Can I call you Condi?
economics?
Condi?
Well, let me start by saying that when I was asked to be Secretary of State by President Bush, actually the only person I called to ask about the job was George Shultz. And I said, so George, what do you think? He said, well, it's the best job in government. And I said, well, George, you should know, because you've held almost every other job in government. But the reason that he said that is perhaps part of the answer to your question, that he always fundamentally believed that the United States had the right foundational principles, and that was much of the reason for our success. One of those foundational principles was, of course, the free market. And of course, the Chicago School, spread particularly in Latin America and other places, had, he thought, the chance to bring other countries out of poverty to use their resources best and to gain prosperity.
Oh my.
But he also believed in the inextricable link between free markets and individual liberty. And that reflected in the way that he took on the challenge, of course, being the Secretary of State as the Soviet Union was beginning to go into its twilight. We forget that George's first years as Secretary, the Soviet Union was a bit on the march. There's 1982, 83, 84. The sense that the Soviet Union was really the future. And from George's point of view, this was nonsense. And this is something that he shared, of course, with Ronald Reagan. That this experiment, as Reagan had called it, this experiment that was practiced on a hapless people, would end up on the ash heap of history. Now, George, who was a great diplomat, would never have said it so boldly as Reagan did. But because they believed in the fundamental principles of the free market and individual liberty, the Soviet Union was on the wrong side of history. And they were together, perfectly willing to say that, perfectly willing to challenge the system. There's a story that Mike likes to tell of George meeting with Gorbachev and saying to Gorbachev, you know, that central planning thing that you've got going, maybe you'd better take off with planning, because you all aren't doing it very well. And can you imagine Gorbachev at that point thinking, who is this guy?
Wow, fascinating. Fascinating, Condi. Powell spoke a little bit. He is going to speak more. He's part of this panel. I thought he was just doing a keynote. We're going to give this a little bit more. I thought Powell would be more of a focus here, but Condi Rice is taking the show.
And his belief in individual liberty to really challenge many of the assumptions about the strength of the Soviet Union at that particular point in time, and then to be there, of course, for the beginning of the end.
Mike, a question for you on the longshoreman strike. Let me set it up. The Nixon years, just after George becomes Secretary of Labor under President Nixon in January '69, he finds himself confronted with the longshoremen's strike. He's under intense pressure for the government to intervene, but he insists on keeping the federal government out of it, forcing the longshoremen and management to the bargaining table on their own. Instead of damaging the entire economy, the strike settles just a month after George Shultz. Why was that such an important episode?
First of all, it set a really important example. Number one, that government intervention sometimes can be an obstacle rather than a provider of successful outcomes. Number two, it's really important because it signaled that people could make their own decisions and would be forced to if they were confronting each other rather than wait around for the government to come in. They wouldn't make their best offers, they wouldn't get serious. This became very clear to me. I was a beneficiary of George's advice.
We got
and
rugged.
friendship.
This is a rug.
We did a lot of things together over the years. Maybe talk about that a bit later, but it becomes really apparent when you're dealing with a whole different context than people that aren't used to thinking about markets, people that aren't used to thinking about individual incentives, people being able to think that way. And that goes back to Jay's comments and Condi's about his being an economist. He was used to this idea that people were trying to do the best they can themselves given their environment, and that if you let them do that, that would collectively lead to the best possible outcome. Kind of a basic theorem of basic economics, which some people forget, and there's always pressure for the government to do something. If you know, all of us have been, Jay still is, but we've been in public office, and the first thing every morning in the briefing room is what's the president going to do about X? And it could be anything. It could be anything the president shouldn't even know about. But so it's important to set that example and to let things play out until there really is something that you desperately need the government to intervene for, if that happens.
Two incidents in the Nixon years that are less, strictly speaking,
Unfortunately,
economic
yes,
than
this
social.
is live.
The Philadelphia Plan. In the spring of 1969, George Shultz issues the Philadelphia Plan, which requires federal contractors to hire minority workers, and he famously makes the remark that he's not imposing quotas, he's ending a quota, and the quota that he was ending was on black workers, and it was 0. As Secretary of Labor, he also ran the White House Cabinet Committee on Education, which was charged with developing a strategy for the peaceful integration of schools in the 7 states of the Deep South. He ended up running it because Vice President Spiro Agnew wanted nothing to do with it. He was given the chairmanship and never turned up for any meetings. There's a famous moment, I heard Mr. Shultz himself tell this story. George Shultz has the chairs of the Mississippi Committee come in. It's a white man and a black man, and he has them sit down together in the White House. And as they get close to an agreement, Secretary of State leaves the room. And I'm quoting George Shultz here. I learned long ago, you mentioned this in your remarks, Jay.
Just say Bitcoin.
I learned long ago
That'd be
that when
great.
parties get this close to an agreement, it's best to let them complete their deal on their own. That way the agreement belongs to them, close quote. By the end of the Nixon administration, this is a statistic I found
Yeah, they were
staggering.
talking about
I
the
wasn't aware of
Soviet
it.
Union for like
More than
quite
90%
some
of black
time.
children in the South were attending integrated schools. All right. He's a labor economist, but in the Philadelphia Plan and in the integration of schools in the South, he's solving social problems. What's going on here? This has something to
Lord.
do with his own principles, with the respect in which everyone holds him. Jay,
I don't
would
think
you like
anybody
to
votes
address
for these people.
these episodes?
I can't believe that
So,
this is even too
this is
nerdy for
something
us.
that people need to know more about George Shultz. This is an extraordinary
George
accomplishment.
Shultz,
and it is
George
consistent through his
Shultz,
career. He started the
George
first
Shultz.
minority program to bring kids into the University of Chicago Business School and many other things along the way. But in this case, Brown v. Board is decided in 1954. This is 15 years later, and there are 7 southern states that have just not desegregated their schools. The Supreme Court makes it clear that the argument is over and we're going to do this. George Shultz he takes over this commission and he picks a black person and a white person from each of the 7 states. He gets
If you're having trouble sleeping lately, just replay this stream on loop. This will put you right to sleep, guaranteed.
the whole idea is this has got to be done without violence, and he manages to get that done. It's an extraordinary accomplishment. How did he do it? This is the sort of the full Shultz playbook of bringing people together, treating them with respect, empowering them, enabling them to take on this terrible, difficult issue. And it really worked. I mean, the schools did open without violence in these 7 southern states, and it's quite a remarkable story, and he really made it happen. So quite extraordinary.
Well, actually, I lived it.
Can I call you Condi?
Because I was a kid in elementary school in Birmingham, Alabama, in the early 1960s, And Brown versus Board of Education 54, essentially nothing happens in integration of the schools, despite the striking down of separate but equal.
They just ignored
They
it.
just ignored it,
Yeah.
just ignored it. And then finally, after the Supreme Court, so they came up with this plan called, just before George's intervention, called choice. Now, choice is a good thing these days. In those days, it wasn't a particularly good choice because good idea, because the idea was probably white parents would choose to keep their kids in white schools, and black parents would choose to send their kids to white schools. As it turns out, nobody chose to do anything. And this is actually kind of a funny story, a few poor teachers were sent to integrate the faculties of these schools. And my mother was one who was going to be sent to a white school.
Really?
Yes, my
white.
father was terrified because he was
White.
worried about the potential violence. As it turns out, my mother didn't go, but they sent this poor white woman to our school at Druid High School. And I felt so
Druid
bad
High
for her
School
because
is a cool
everybody just
name.
treated her really, really badly.
Yeah, my
she
ADD
was
is
the
like at a
only
10
one.
right
So
now.
this was
Holy.
going pretty imperfectly. And I think one reason that I told this story to George, and I think one reason it was
don't know if I
important to
can do
get
this.
people together and then get a plan for how to do this, which is what the Philadelphia plan really was because it was going nowhere, and to the degree that it was going anywhere, it wasn't going in a very good direction. And so George and I would kind of laugh about my own personal experience in what was going on in the South before the Philadelphia plan.
You know, it has gotten a bad name of late, and California voters have rejected it twice, and perhaps it went overboard a bit. But back then, in the Philadelphia building trades, there was a quota of 0 African Americans.
A
And
very
so
low quota.
economists hate quotas. And a quota of 0 is a bad quota, just like a quota of a large amount. Okay, so I think it reflects back on his thinking as an economist. And as
Very
Jay
low
said, there was obviously a moral as well as an economic justification.
Well, I think he felt the moral side very strongly because both
What
in the
are we
Philadelphia plan
watching?
and in the work with the school system, because again, it went
Okay.
back to George's view that America was the hope of the world. America was the place that had gotten mostly right, but there were times when America had not gotten it right, and on this, we had not.
It must be a prank.
Back to economics and
It must be a prank. We're getting rage
And
baited.
here I'm going to ask,
We are getting rage baited. This is the world's greatest rage bait. None of this is real, even though it's live right now. It must be a prank.
Treasury Paul Volcker, who advised President Nixon to end the convertibility of the dollar into gold. President Nixon closes the gold window on August 15th, 1971. I'm going to quote Milton Friedman, his observation on this, quote, "The closing of the gold window opened the way
Oops. The real reason we went live is so I could show you my new haircut.
so foreign to the way
Nah,
we
that's
do
me
business
coping.
and think about the currencies today that it requires a little bit of
my.
effort simply to take us back to the moment
This man was on
when
some kind
the
of
dollar was
island.
pegged to gold, and what the
Some
debate
island, they would
concerned,
say.
why it was important. Who would like to take on? Mike,
I
start
guess
us. Start us
I'll
off.
start. So if we go back to the end of World War II,
Crypto
and
poppy.
what George and
Whatever.
Condi like to call the Global Economic and Security Commons was
Oh my
established.
God.
The International Monetary
I
Fund,
can't
the General
even hear
Agreement on
them
Tariffs
still on
and
a
Trade, and
Chris.
the World Bank were established. And we
We might as
established
well not even
the
be saying
dollar as the
words.
centerpiece of the
The
exchange
haircut
rate
really is
system.
the whole stream at this
Most
point.
countries would have fixed exchange rates, and the U.S. would peg the dollar, exchange dollars for $35.
Didn't know they were such talented
$35
rage
per ounce
baiters.
of gold, and it pledged to do that for the foreign reserves, dollar reserves of foreign countries. So this again was George in the
Can't fight
international
it.
arena as well, because it affected other countries.
Can't fight it.
Now,
That
Fig-
enabled us to backstop economic growth across
well,
much of the
it
world.
was,
Is that the idea?
it's a little more complicated
That's
than
not the
that.
reason.
And I don't
That's
want
not
to
it.
bore people
I don't know what he's yelling
in the
about.
audience with this. But what it meant was
You
you
don't
could
wanna-
not have other
I just
countries
spit.
and could not have
You don't want to
an
bore the
independent
audience
monetary
with this.
policy
Oh, sir.
along with the fixed exchange
Sir,
rates
sir.
and free capital flows.
Don't worry about
Because
that
if their
one.
interest rates were lower than ours, capital would flow out.
This guy graduated with
There'd be
Jesus.
pressure to devalue their currencies, and the opposite if their interest
Bird.
rates were higher than ours.
Oh my lord.
So it created quite a conundrum, and we've seen that in more recent years when countries that had pegged their currency to the dollar ended that, and we've seen what happens. It was a little chaotic. So this, I think, was a major move. There had been a big intellectual debate for decades in economics about
Thousands of
whether
years.
fixed
even,
or flexible
perhaps.
exchange rates were better, and I think the flexible, market-oriented approach wound up winning, I think, to the world's advantage. So that was part one. Part two was...
Oh God, it's only part one. It's only part
because of
one.
this sudden change, and the dollar, we weren't going to exchange $35 for an ounce of gold anymore. Foreign holders of U.S. dollar reserves were going to be in a pickle, and so they had to we couldn't
Ooh, a pickle. Shout out to
revalue the
pickle.
dollar. They had to revalue against us, and so what happened was President Nixon imposed a 10% import charge that was going to be removed if and when they revalued their currencies appropriately, which is what happened. And within 18 months, the world kind of came to a bit of a equilibrium, and things were going okay. And then a year later, we had the oil
This is only
shock.
part one of my 80
And so,
part answer.
I can't resist asking the chairman of the Fed if it worked. If we hadn't had the oil shock, it was a good idea.
We were going to switch to a floating rate system eventually. Milton Friedman was right about this, and
All right.
it was a good thing that we did.
Okay, so this brings us, Condi, would you hop in on the gold window?
Which person here is not like the others? I'll leave that to the economist.
All right, then the wage and price controls, again, I'll set it up.
my
President
Lord.
Nixon
Oh, my
imposes
Lord.
wage and price controls, director as he was then.
All right. All right, guys, slow down. This is just way too exciting. I can't keep up. We were promised a Jerome Powell keynote intro. It was speech. I don't think it's happening. I think that was it. I think the intro keynote speech was him literally talking about this guy. And I think when he said he's not going to talk about current economics, I think he was being serious. I can't tell because I have my brain. Maybe I'm being extra right now, but my brain cannot hear words anymore. It's even it's just so hypnotic. Thank God that guy, made a point not to bore the audience, because that could have been dangerous. Here's what we're gonna do. We tried. We did great. You guys did great. This, I will say, might be the most boring coverage of Jerome Powell we've ever done. Don't let it taint you. Next time we see him, we'll be at the FOMC, and it will not be boring. You gotta take the bad with the good. It's the only way you can get the gold at the bottom. The toy at the bottom of the cereal box. We did our best. I know you guys want to stay and stream forever, but we did our best. Chair Atkins of the SEC will speak tomorrow at 10 a.m. Keep your eyes peeled for a stream then. That's an emergency announcement type scenario. We've seen a lot of emergency type scenario announcements over the last year, and none of them have really been emergency. So it will be. Here's what I can promise: it'll be more interesting than this. I appreciate you for tuning in today. It's 8:30, and I don't want to sit here and listen to this anymore. I'm sorry. If you would like to, you can literally just go on YouTube and type in possible stream in the universe, and it should be the first live stream result that you click. So I appreciate it. You guys are the best. Literally, this turned off, which is very strange. I didn't even end it, but YouTube says I ended it. Either way, make sure you subscribe, join us in Discord at discord.gg/TomCrown. Jump over on YouTube, follow us there, youtube.com/TomCrown, and I will catch you guys very soon, I promise.